Okay, so Diego, just to repeat very quickly what we talked about, you have your research questions here and your thesis statement here, that's fine. I would do your introduction at the end, so don't worry about the hook and the background at this point. We can do that at the end. I would start off by developing your 2 to 4 main headings here as outlined.
Yeah.
And with regard to your thesis statement, you have a comma splice here, which, so nowadays, students from 4th and 5th graders do not comprehend what they read. So I don't know, and teachers from this level of education should know alternatives to enhance students' abilities with the use of strategies like the one that is called Think Aloud. All right, so I would just double check your comma splice here. So, you have teachers from this level of education should know about alternatives to enhance students' abilities. So in your literature review, you need to, I understand that you want to talk about Think Aloud strategy, but maybe come up with 2 to 3 main, because you talk about alternatives. So are there various alternatives? Are you going to talk about 2 or 3 alternatives or theoretical, ideas? And you need to come up with these sections that relate to Think Aloud strategy. So they might be some theoretical frameworks or theoretical theories that relate to Think Aloud. And this is what you need to kind of think about or add here in these level headings, these headings here.
Okay.
So they could be anywhere from 2 to 4 ideas, but this is what I'd like to kind of see what you're thinking about, what ideas that link to this Think Aloud, because I understand you're going to be researching Think Aloud strategy, but what about, how do you, so think about the ideas, the notions, the concepts that are all related to one way or another this one strategy. And so there probably is going to be some theory. So maybe there's a social cultural theory that might relate to Think Aloud. Maybe there's some sort of cognitive theory that you want to talk about that relates to this theory or this strategy, Think Aloud.
So do you think it is not complete, right?
Well, I understand what you want to say here, but I think we just need to change the wording. To make it more explicit, and maybe the easiest thing to do is to write out your headings first and then go back to your thesis statement and say, okay, how can I put into words these ideas that I've listed out as headings, right? So I don't think that there's just a couple of grammatical things with the comma splice, but I understand what you want to say, and you're right. You're on the right track. I need to kind of know what these headings are to look at your thesis statement again to say, okay, are you talking about what those headings are? So you can work backwards. So you put the headings first and then go back to the thesis statement and say, okay, am I happy with what I have?
It's like analyze if the topics are in the thesis statement.
Exactly. Because
the thesis statement is cover those topics.
Right, because your subheadings have to be aligned to your thesis statement, right? So it doesn't matter which direction we work. At the end of the day, they have to be aligned. So think of it just like an outline. Think of it like you're doing kind of a mini outline. This is the main idea of your thesis, and these are subheadings. These are subsections of whatever you talk about in your thesis. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. So think about that, and these can be, you can go from the theoretical to the practical. You can go to the general to the specific. I'm talking about now how you're going to organize your literature review. And if you haven't had a chance yet to look at developing an argument, that link in week 2 in Canvas, where I talk about how to organize your data, these are some examples. You can do it chronologically. You can do it, as I mentioned, general to the specific, theoretical to the practical, so on. And in your case, since if you're building up to a Think Aloud strategy, which is practical, you might move from the theoretical to the practical. And so you talk about theory and different aspects of theory, and then you go down to the practical and talk about then this strategy and how it relates to these theoretical concepts that you already mentioned.
Okay.
All right?
Okay.
So
What do
if
you
you
think
want to...
about research questions?
How do teachers enhance reading comprehension? Now, enhance, be careful there. That's like enhance.
Like,
Maybe how do teachers apply a think aloud strategy that promotes speaking, for example, or that promotes some sort of linguistic area that you want to talk about, some sort of grammar, vocabulary, whatever. And if you choose, for example, grammar, maybe there's some theory that talks about grammar that relates to think aloud. See what I mean?
Yeah.
So try to choose think aloud strategy and one or two other linguistic aspects, whether it's the four skills, vocabulary, grammar, maybe it's assessment. I mean, there's a lot of other areas. So just choose, one. Don't make it too broad, but choose one other linguistic aspect that you can link to this, that you want to measure, that you want to investigate. And so,
maybe.
Well, you have here reading comprehension, but maybe how do teachers use or implement the Think Aloud strategy for learners to practice reading strategies, reading comprehension strategies. So then in your theory you can also talk about reading strategies.
Like the one that is answered, why teachers should...
I see, why teachers... Okay, be careful with your grammar. So why should teachers, or why do teachers use strategies? That's what I would... Why do they use it? You ask them, why do you use this strategy? Oh, because of this. It's not so much what should you do, right? You may make, suggestions at the end, but that's not the focus of your research. The focus is just to simply find out, why do you use these strategies? For this reason. And maybe you look up other research. Why do teachers use strategies? And the experts say this. So I would be careful with modals like should. Right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So you can say, you can ask, why do teachers use strategy, metacognitive and monitoring strategies during a Think Aloud so is this Think Aloud a strategy or an activity, or you need how?
Strategy.
Okay, so you're mixing Think Aloud strategy with reading strategies.
Okay.
So just be consistent, whatever you call it, in order to promote. Yeah. So this is the idea. Just check your grammar here and. Be careful. I would remove enhance. Just how do they apply the strategy? Now, these two are how they do it and why. So basically, you're looking at the how and why, and both of these questions will be very similar at the end. The only difference is one is how, and the other is why. So. I would pretty much design these questions very similarly and just change the question word. One's how, one's why.
One is based on the process and the other one is like the reasons.
And this would be coming directly from the teacher as far as their interpretation through interviews, maybe personal reflections, maybe having
observation.
The teacher, if the teacher is willing to do a reflection, maybe. But we can talk about that more later. But that's something you can measure. The why is the perception or the perspective or opinion from the teacher. The how is what you observe and also what the teacher tells you. The teacher may say, well, I do this. They may explain how they do something. Okay. So the interview is going to tell you both the how and the why. And your observation is going to tell you the how. But the why is coming directly from the teacher. You can't address the why without asking the teacher his or her opinion on the rationale behind doing a strategy or activity.
Okay.
So, but yeah, I think you're on the right track. Just check your grammar in both the research questions and your thesis statement. And I would come up with these headings first.
What is the error in the first one, in the thesis statement? That the comma.
You have a comma splice here, okay, and so it doesn't really fit. So either add a connector or modify. Yeah, or add a connector. So if you want to make this a compound sentence, nowadays Mexican students. Teachers from this level. Nowadays, students from the yeah. Think about it in your introduction. If you're going to be talking about this, may be too specific to talk about in your thesis statement. Maybe it's more just reading comprehension or EFL learners and reading comprehension. Hasta ahí. It's not really necessary to talk about the actual participants, unless you are just all your literature is going to talk about.
No.
So don't feel like you have to be that specific here, but it's primarily language learners and reading comprehension, right? And you want them.
Those are like the keywords, right, for the thesis
statement? I think so.
Yeah.
So teachers teaching. Now you can decide if you want to talk about kids or not in the thesis statement. The teachers, because here you even mentioned of this level, so you're putting yourself in a very specific case. So even though this might be your research, and maybe you have some research talking about kids, which hopefully you have some research talking about kids and reading comprehension. Maybe some of your literature, I'm assuming, will be maybe for adults. I don't know, but you need to look at your level here. If you're going to research children, I don't know if we talked about this, but if you're researching children, try to have as much information about children and reading comprehension as possible. But it's okay, I think, if you can't find all literature about children to talk about adults to compare and contrast. But you do need to have some information about children and learning a foreign language or additional language and reading comprehension.
And what happens if the theory talks about all levels and I apply the study just in children? Children.
When you say all levels, as long as some of those levels are children, and you have and some information, I don't know how much information you have, but let's say 30%. I mean, would be okay. I mean, if you just have one sentence that talks about children, that's not enough.
Okay.
But I would say, I don't know, at least 30% to 50% children in your literature, that you have several authors talking about, okay, adults are like this, children is a little bit different, maybe they compare and contrast, or maybe there's some similarities. But I would have, a little bit of data, some information in your literature would be around children.
Okay.
And that way it's, within the context of your own research. If you're only going to focus on children, you can reference that, compare and contrast your findings with those of children, other research that involve children, and or other research involving adults.
Okay.
Maybe there's some similarities and differences there.
Okay.
So yeah, I would modify that. And you talk about they should know alternatives to enhance students' abilities to use strategies. So you talk about here, you're mentioning alternatives, and then you mention one. So, that's a little bit awkward, the way you word that. Maybe you want to talk about, there are several theories, alternative theories, that address or that contribute to students' abilities to improve reading comprehension, right? And you may or may not even mention the Think Aloud strategy. I mean, the idea is the theory. At the end, you want to if you mention one theoretical strategy, that's fine, and then you go on to your own research. But the main ideas here in your thesis statement should be the theory. And if you want to mention this one strategy, fine, but the main idea is these alternative theories that relate to, because you want to talk about kind of the theory, and then throughout the theory you're going to insert practical examples, right? And one of them might be think aloud strategy.
Okay.
Does that
it's clear.
make sense? So
Yeah.
Go back and make those changes, add this text here if you want me to look at it. Once you have modified that, send me an email or come by my office and we'll talk about it. But now's the time to start typing away. Writing up our literature review so we make sure we finish by February 28th.
Okay.
Alrighty?
Let me go and start doing it.
Okay. See you later.
Thank you.
Alrighty.